Welcome to the Lion's Share podcast, where we break down today's most impactful research and bring fresh insights from the academic frontier straight to you.
We talk a lot about AI changing things, right? But it feels like nowhere is that change happening faster, maybe more, fundamentally than in marketing research.
Absolutely. It's a huge industry. You mentioned over $84 billion just last year.
Yeah, exactly. And so today we're doing a deep dive on this really specific academic paper. It kind of shifts the focus from AI just being like a fancy tool to AI maybe being a real research partner. It's called AI Human Hybrids for Marketing Research, leveraging large language models, LLMs, as collaborators.
And that framing, collaborators, that's the whole point. The authors aren't just asking, can LLMs do tasks quicker? They're really testing if this kind of hybrid approach, human plus LLM, gives you boosts in both efficiency, like speed and cost and effectiveness. Actually better insight.
Across the whole process, too.
Yeah, systematically.
Right.
From figuring out the problem, designing the study, picking the sample, right through to the data analysis at the end.
And what I really appreciated for anyone actually, designing research is they tackled both sides. They went into the qualitative stuff, interviews, transcripts, all that messy nuance.
Which is notoriously hard to scale.
Totally. And then they also looked at the quantitative side, structured surveys, psychometrics. That dual focus, I think that's what makes it really practical for, say, a whole research department thinking about adopting this.
Precisely. Because the big question for an insights manager is, okay, where can we actually use this stuff safely, effectively?
Right.
And this paper, it gives a pretty rigorous way to think about that. They actually teamed up with a big Fortune 500 food company to test it out.
Which gives it real-world weight, doesn't it? They basically took two studies the company had already done back in 2019.
One qual, one quant.
Yeah, one of each. And they just reran them using GPT-4.
And using those original human results as the comparison, the ground truth benchmark, that's what makes the findings so compelling.
Definitely. But, okay, you can't just, type a question into ChatGPT and expect research-grade output. You need what they call prompt engineering.
Yeah, prompt engineering is key. You have to carefully structure how you ask the LLM to behave. It's about turning it into either a synthetic respondent, someone answering your questions, or a very specific kind of analyst.
How does that actually work? What does that look like in the prompt?
Well, they break it down into two main parts. First is the system role. Think of this as setting the stage, giving the LLM its persona or context.
Okay.
So you might tell it, okay, you are a 30-year-old marketing manager in Chicago who loves trying new vegan restaurants and feels strongly about sustainability. You define who it's supposed to be.
Gotcha. Demographic, psychographic, the whole deal.
Exactly. And then the second part is the user role, and that's the specific task. What question are you asking it? And really importantly, what format do you want the answer in?
So answer this on a 1 to 5 scale and then give me 3 sentences explaining why.
Precisely. Getting those two roles defined correctly is how you move the LLM from just being, a general knowledge machine to providing focused, relevant input for your specific research need.
Right, because if it doesn't know who it's supposed to be or how to answer, the data's just noise.
Useless, yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into study 1 then, the qualitative one. This was about generating synthetic interview responses for a concept around Friendsgiving.
Yeah, they were exploring this idea of a Friendsgiving celebration, trying to understand the emotions, the traditions, what younger consumers are looking for, standard qualitative exploration.
And the findings here on the data generation part were pretty surprising, right?
Stunning, honestly.
Yeah.
They tried a few different ways of setting up the LLM, different hybrid conditions. One of the most interesting was where the LLM was basically acting as both the respondent and its own moderator.
Wait, how does that work? It prompts itself.
Kind of, yeah. If its first answer was a bit thin, the system was set up to push itself. Like, can you elaborate on that or tell me more about the feeling?
Wow. Okay. And that setup, the LLM Hybrid 3, you're saying it produced better responses than actual humans.
Objectively better, according to human experts who rated all the responses later, blind. In the statistical model they used, this hybrid LLM approach scored significantly higher for both depth, like how much detail was there, and insightfulness, how much new understanding it provided. The scores jumped by 0.680 and 0.498, which is huge in these kinds of models.
That is kind of mind-blowing. The moderated LLM gave richer, more insightful answers.
But, and this is a really important but, there was a trade-off, a methodological catch.
Okay.
That amazing depth, it came with complexity. the LLM-generated text had a significantly lower reading ease score. Basically, you needed about a 12th grade education level minimum to comfortably understand the synthetic answers. They were dense.
Huh. So richer data, but harder for the average person, maybe even the average manager, to just pick up and read.
Exactly. Which leads to a really interesting question about the human expert's role, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. If the machine gives you deeper but more complex stuff, does the human's job become less about finding the insights in the first place and more about translating or simplifying the machine's output?
I think that's precisely the tension this study highlights. Maybe the human effort shifts away from the grunt work of coding basic themes, which the LLM seems to do well, and towards synthesizing and communicating these richer but denser machine-generated insights for business decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about when they use the LM as an analyst, looking at the data collected from real humans?
Ah, right. Here the story is more about efficiency, but also effectiveness. The LLM did the thematic analysis, pulling out key sentences, grouping themes, writing summaries.
And how did it compare to human analysts doing the same task?
Really well on coverage. It managed to recover about 96% of the themes that the human analysts found, so very little was lost.
Okay, 96% recovery is good, efficient.
But here's the kicker for effectiveness. The LLM analysis also found new themes. About 23% of the themes it identified were things the human analysts had completely missed.
Whoa. Why? Why would the humans miss them?
Well, think about reading dozens of transcripts. Fatigue sets in, maybe cognitive biases. You start seeing patterns you expect to see. The LLM doesn't get tired, doesn't have the same biases, it just processes the text.
So in Qual, LLM generates deeper data, if moderated, analyzes more comprehensively. But you said the preferred summaries at the end were always a hybrid.
That's right. When they showed different summary types to experts, human only, LLM only, or combinations like human data LLM analysis or LLM data human analysis, the experts consistently preferred the hybrid versions.
Interesting. So it's not about replacing the human, it's about finding the best combination, which brings us back to that question about the role of the expert, the DBA or PhD practitioner.
Exactly. Given all that, especially the preference for hybrid summaries, what does this really signal about where the human expert adds the most value going forward? Is it shifting?
I think it has to be. It feels like the value isn't in the weeds anymore, reading every line, doing basic coding. The LLM can handle that heavy lifting, maybe even better. The human value seems to be moving upstream, framing the research question, designing the study, defining those personas for the system role.
Setting the strategy.
Setting the strategy, exactly. And then downstream, taking the LLM's output, synthesizing it, validating it, adding the context, the ethical considerations, and telling the story. You become the architect and the quality control.
Architect and synthesizer. I like that. It's a big shift for how research teams might need to think about their skills and structures.
Definitely. Okay, let's switch over to study 2 then. The quantitative side. This was replicating a survey, right, about dog food?
Yeah, the new refrigerated dog food concept. They were testing reactions to packaging, ingredients, purchase intent, typical concept testing survey questions.
And the goal was to see if synthetic LLM respondents could basically mimic the patterns you see in human survey data.
Right. Can the LLM fill out a survey like a real target consumer would? Their first attempt used what's called a zero-shot approach. Basically, just giving the LLM the survey question without much prior context or examples.
How did that go?
Mixed bag. The good news was the LLM generally got the direction right. If humans like the concept overall, the average synthetic score was also high. If humans dislike something, the LLM's average reflected that too. It got the basic valence.
Okay, it's something.
But there were big problems with the statistical properties of the data. Major psychometric shortcomings.
Like what?
2 main things. First, much lower response heterogeneity. The LLM answers were too clustered together, not enough variance or spread. Real human responses are messy, people disagree, there's variation. The LLM was too uniform.
Right, not enough difference between the synthetic people, so harder to do segmentation or find distinct groups.
Exactly. And the second, maybe even more critical issue, was poor internal consistency. It failed to replicate the expected relationships between different attitudes.
Can you give an example?
Sure. You'd normally expect a strong positive correlation between someone rating the ingredients as healthiest and rating the product overall as best quality, right? Those ideas are linked in a consumer's mind.
Makes sense.
The zero-shot LLM data didn't really show those meaningful connections. The correlations were weak or non-existent. The underlying structure of consumer attitudes wasn't there.
Oof. Okay, for anyone doing serious quant work, like DBAs running structural models, that's a showstopper. You need that structure.
Complete deal breaker. If the data doesn't have realistic variance and doesn't show how attitudes logically connect, you can't trust it for anything beyond maybe a simple average score. But they didn't stop there. They showed how to fix it.
Okay, how? What techniques did they use?
Two key ones. The first is called few-shot learning, or sometimes in-context learning. It's relatively simple. You just include a few examples of the question and a desired answer format within the prompt itself.
So you're kind of showing the LLM what a good answer looks like for that specific task, giving it a mini tutorial.
Exactly. It helps it understand the task better and mimic the response style. The second technique, though, is more powerful, especially for adding context. Retrieval-augmented generation, or RAG.
RAG, heard of it, but break it down in this context.
Okay, so instead of just asking the LLM the survey question, our RAG first retrieves relevant information from an external knowledge base. Think of it like, before the LLM answers the dog food survey question, you force it to read relevant snippets from, say, transcripts of earlier qualitative interviews you did with pet owners about their deep feelings on pet nutrition.
I see. So you're feeding it highly relevant, specific background info before it generates the survey answer. It's not just relying on its general training data.
Precisely. It augments the generation process with retrieved contextual knowledge. You're grounding its response in reality, or at least in the specific domain knowledge you provide.
That's clever. And did these techniques, few-shot and RAG, actually fix the problems?
They did. Yeah, significantly. Using both together, what they call the LLM3 condition, dramatically improved things. The response heterogeneity, the variance, got much closer to the human benchmark levels. The data became messier, more realistic.
Okay, good. And the internal consistency, the correlations.
That improved substantially too.
Yeah.
LLM3 was much better at recovering those meaningful, positive correlations between related attitudes like healthiest ingredients and best quality. The psychometric structure started to look much more like the human data.
Which brings us to guiding question 3. Why is getting these properties right, heterogeneity and internal consistency, so absolutely critical for quantitative research rigor? And what's the risk if your synthetic data doesn't have them?
Well, the rigor comes down to reliability and validity. Without enough heterogeneity and a variance, you lose statistical power. You can't reliably detect differences between groups or concepts. Your market segmentation might be completely artificial. And without internal consistency, the correlations that show your measures are actually tapping into the underlying constructs you care about, like brand trust or purchase intent. Well, those constructs fall apart. Your complex models, factor analysis, SEM, driver analysis, they won't work properly. They might give you results, but they won't be valid.
So the managerial risk is huge. You could make multi-million-dollar decisions, which product to launch, who to target, based on data that looks real on the surface, but is fundamentally flawed underneath. It's not actually simulating the market.
Exactly. It's just echoing the prompt in a statistically weak way. That lack of structural integrity is the real danger.
Okay, that's a critical point for practitioners. Now, the authors also talk about practical roadmaps, especially for using this improved quantitative synthetic data. They bring up this idea of backward marketing research.
Yeah, it's an older concept, actually, from Andreessen back in '85, but it finds new life here. The backward idea is basically, instead of designing your research and then thinking about the decisions, you start with the decision you need to make and work backward to figure out the minimum research needed.
And how does synthetic data fit into that backward approach?
Well, the roadmap suggests using synthetic data before you even consider running a full human survey. Generate synthetic responses to your concept survey first.
Why? What does that buy you?
Huge potential efficiency gains. You can get an early read on results. Does one concept totally blow the others away synthetically? Maybe you don't need a huge human sample, or maybe you only need to field the winner.
So it helps you anticipate findings.
Yes, and it helps plan the human study better. You can estimate the likely variance from the synthetic data, which helps you calculate the required human sample size more accurately. No more over or undersampling nearly as much.
Or potentially realizing the concepts are too similar, or the insights aren't new, and maybe you don't need the human survey at all for this specific question.
That's the ultimate efficiency gain, right? Obviating the need for expensive field work if the synthetic data gives you a clear enough, reliable enough answer early on. It provides this incredibly fast feedback loop.
That really could change workflow. Get a robust preview in hours, not weeks. But we have to talk limitations. The authors are clear this isn't a magic bullet. What are the big caveats?
Two huge ones stand out. Bias and generalizability. First, bias. LLMs are trained on internet data, which is full of human biases, gender, race, culture, you name it.
Right.
Using these models in marketing research, especially if you're dealing with sensitive topics or targeting specific, perhaps vulnerable groups, carries a real risk of amplifying those biases or just making stuff up hallucinating. You absolutely need a human in the loop for ethical oversight.
That seems non-negotiable. The human as the ethical gatekeeper, what's the other limitation?
Generalizability. These studies, while rigorous, were done with one company, two specific contexts. They show proof of concept, but you can't just assume this LLM hybrid approach will work perfectly for your company's specific products or customer base right out of the box.
So what do they recommend?
A test and learn approach. Companies need to run their own validation studies using their own historical data. See where the LLM shines for their specific context and where it falls short or might be inappropriate.
Okay, which leads nicely to our next question. For a DBA or PhD practitioner setting up those internal validation checks, what should they be looking for beyond just, like, comparing the average scores between the old human data and new synthetic data?
Great question. Comparing means is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We saw the zero-shot LLM could mimic averages okay, but lacks structure.
Right.
So the validation has to go deeper. You must prioritize checking if the LLM can replicate the key psychometric properties from your historical human data. Can it reproduce similar levels of variance, the heterogeneity?
Okay, check variance. What else?
And critically, can it reproduce the known patterns of correlations, the internal consistency? If your past data always showed a strong link between variable X and variable Y for a certain customer segment, does the synthetic data replicate that specific structural relationship?
Got it. So you're checking if the synthetic data has the same statistical foundation, the same underlying structure, not just similar surface-level averages. If it fails those structural checks consistently in certain areas.
That's a huge red flag. It tells you the LLM, at least in its current state or with your current prompting, isn't reliable for predictive or complex modeling in that specific domain. It might be okay for simple tasks, but not for high-stakes analysis.
Makes sense. Validate the structure, not just the scores. So wrapping things up then, what's the big takeaway here?
I think the core message is about complementary strengths. This isn't AI versus human, it's AI plus human. The hybrid model really seems to work.
How so?
Humans keep the lead on the strategic parts, framing the research, ensuring ethical use, interpreting nuances, synthesizing the final story, the high-level thinking and judgment. Right. While the LLM takes on the heavy lifting, churning through qualitative data, generating realistic survey responses under the right conditions, doing complex analysis quickly. It handles the scale, the repetition, the data processing.
Unlocking efficiency, but also, as we saw in the qualitative study, potentially even greater depth and insight.
Exactly. Efficiency and effectiveness, which was the original goal.
It really paints a picture of a future that's, well, kind of already here. I like that quote they included from Ethan Mollick.
Oh yeah, today's AI is the worst AI you will ever use.
Right. Which is both daunting and exciting. If this is the worst it's going to be, imagine the possibilities as these models get better. The potential for using these hybrid approaches, especially for those hard-to-reach B2B samples or really niche consumer groups, it feels like research capabilities could evolve incredibly quickly.
The barrier to entry for sophisticated analysis and generation is dropping fast.
So the final thought for you, our listener, thinking about your own work, what validation checks are you going to run first? If you took some of your company's historical survey data right now, how would you test an LLM's ability to predict not just the average response, but that crucial heterogeneity, that variance?
Thanks for tuning into the Lion's Share podcast. If you enjoyed today's discussion, share it with a friend, and join us next time for more ideas worth talking about. We'll see you next time.